Hey guys, it's Paradise, and what if I told you one of the best new bleed builds was actually a pure dexterity build? Just when you thought bleed builds got all of the love in the DLC with so many powerful options, it turns out this extremely awesome weapon that mainly scales with dex is actually a top tier burst damage and bleed status builder. So if you want to bleed, hack, slash and dash, then this build just might be for you. Drop a like below if you enjoyed this build guide and comment to let us know, and we'll start off by talking about this awesome new weapon, the Falx. Firstly, it's a curved sword, so it has a really good moveset, but also can be power stance to dual wield it even if you only have one of the weapon. It requires 12 strength and 15 dex, but at plus 10 scaling it mainly goes into dex with B rank and has a very nice passive bleed of 55. However, due to the fact that this weapon has no scaling with Arcane, it means that this bleed cannot be improved, which is actually a good thing in this instance. You see, this means we can purely focus on pumping up our dexterity stat to get our damage as high as possible without having to split between dex and Arcane. This also means we can use our leftover stat points to access buffs like Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, further boosting the pure power of this build. You might be wondering how this weapon is so good for a bleed build without any arcane scaling. Well, that's where the unique skill of the weapon comes in, the Revenger's Blade. This lets you dash up to an enemy with a double-handed strike on impact, which can also be charged to increase the damage and the length of the dash. Then with a strong attack, you can do a follow-up that has you executing an insanely fast attack combo that hacks the enemies to pieces, and oh boy does it. Thanks to the high damage and rapid hits of the skill, you're going to proc bleed super quickly, even without that arcane scaling just with the passive bleed, and because of our high dex investment for pure damage, it's going to hit very hard anyway. The great thing is the initial dash of the skill not only does great damage, but you can actually opt not to charge it when at close range in order to spam the follow-up rapid hack and slash attack. And then if the enemy moves away from you, you can then charge it again to use it as a gap closer to deal increased damage, and then go into the hack and slash follow-up attack again. This makes for a very deadly playstyle, and it's actually really strong in PvP too. To get the Falx, you basically need to kill Horn Scent, and this can be done in several ways. If you need a full walkthrough, we have a dedicated guide on the channel, but the quick version is, depending on your choices in the DLC, you may encounter him right before the final boss when Leader and the others attack you. Or he might invade you outside of the Church of Bud area, where you can take him on in a 1v1, again depending on your choices. So let's go over the rest of the items, our gear, armor, talismans, and the stats. Of course, you want the Falx and you want to get it to plus 10 for maximum damage. And then for our offhand, I recommend the Clawmark Seal, as we do have some strength, but we're not really using incantations for damage with this. We're purely using it for the buffs, so the scaling doesn't really matter here, but this will be the strongest seal that we can bring in order to do Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bestial Vitality if you want to bring those. Of course, for the helmet, White Mask is going to be just a top tier option for any bleed build. Basically, as soon as the bleed procs, we get a big bonus to our attack power, so White Mask, obvious for most bleed builds. And of course, the Rakshas's armor set. This is fantastic because each piece increases our total all damage dealt, but we do take a bit more damage in return, but I think the trade-off is worth it, especially when our damage is just this high. For the actual talismans, we're starting off with the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia. This gives us an incrementally increasing attack power bonus as we hit rapidly, and trust me, you're hitting super rapidly with the skill of this, so you definitely want to bring this one, it's super powerful. The Shard of Alexander will also boost the attack of our skills, aka the thing that we'll be spamming, so this is going to greatly boost our overall damage as well. Of course, as with any bleed build, the Lord of Blood's Exaltation basically functions the same as the White Mask. When a bleed procs, we gain a big bonus to attack power, they synergize together, they stack together, so as soon as we hit our first bleed, we're then dealing even more damage. Our final slot here is customizable. So if you wanted to, you could slap on something that will give you a bit more health. You could put on something like the Erdtree's Favor, you could put on the two-headed Turtle Talisman, or even these jar arsenals to increase your weight, you know, depending on the utility that you want to bring for yourself, or one of these heirlooms that will directly boost a particular stat. Of course, you've got damage reduction things like the Dragon Crest or the Pearl Drake for either physical here or non-physical damage here, but there is two other options that I would recommend. So we have the Godfrey icon on, and this is because it is a charged skill, so this will actually boost the damage of our skill itself, and I believe it also applies to the follow-up. It certainly applies to the initial dash, which can hit very hard at between 4 to 5k depending on the enemy, and then of course the follow-up attack goes nuts and procs bleed like crazy. It's hard to test it on the follow-up, to be honest, but I think it does, not 100%, but it definitely does apply it to the initial hit. The other option to go here is Millicent's Prosthesis. This functions very similarly to the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, but does stack together. If I had the Prosthesis, which I don't have, I would probably put it in here, but Godfrey's icon is also a very competitive option for this slot. Of course, for the actual spells that we were going to bring, Golden Vow, this is an attack and defense buff, really, really good. Flame Grant Me Strength, more physical damage and a bit of fire damage, not bad. And Bestial Vitality is a heal over time, which will basically help with our Wondrous Physick mix, because I am bringing the Blood-Sucking Cracked tier. This drains your health, but gives you a massive 20% attack power boost. It's just huge. You just deal way more damage with this thing up. You just have to keep on top of your health. But our damage output is so high, the enemy's dead before it's usually a problem. And then we have the Thorny Crack tier, because again, we are doing those consecutive attacks, so we're hitting super hard, so we can make real use of this. And for our stats, I suggest pumping Vigor all the way up to 60. You could go between 50 and 60, depending on how good you are at dodge rolling. A lot of people are liking 60 for the DLC, as they are very fast hitting and mobile bosses, but 50 is definitely viable, or lower if you're really feeling skillful. For Mind, I like to do 20. This gives us pretty much enough to play with when it comes with buffing up and spamming the actual skill itself. And for Endurance, 25 is nice to give us that medium dodge roll with this current setup, and also enough stamina to play with for attacks and dodge rolls and spamming all that good stuff. Now, Strength, the actual requirement for the weapon itself is 12. I am, of course, a little higher than some of you guys might be. I'm at level 177, so I'm going to put my remaining points in Strength up to 21, but 12 will be the requirement, and that's what you basically want to have as a baseline. For Dexterity, though, juice this all the way up to 80 if you can, as high as you can. This is where primarily all of our damage is coming from, as it's got that B scaling in Dex on the weapon, so you want at least 80 Dexterity, as high as possible. Dump Intelligence, you don't want anything. For Faith, we're going to go 25 if you can afford it, for that Golden Vow and the other various buffs to improve our overall damage. And dump Arcane, because like we said, you're not going to improve that bleed because there's no Arcane scaling, so dump Arcane. But at a baseline, we could actually take away the extra points I've got in and go down to 12 Strength. You can see here, you could also drop down to 50 Vigor if you wanted to, and if you absolutely needed to, you could remove the buffs and dump Faith, or go down a little bit on our Dexterity and actually put some Heirloom Talismans on to actually push us up to that 80 mark. But these are the stats that you want to go with to deal the most damage with this particular weapon that I'm having an absolute blast with. Tell me what you think of the build down in the comments below, and drop a like if you do try it out and see how impressive it actually is. And make sure to subscribe for more Elden Ring coming your way very, very soon.